Dr. Feroz Sidwar worked at the European Hospital in Khan Yunis in March, and in October he published a piece in the New York Times. Gathering the evidence of 65 medical workers in Gaza, it's a comprehensive account of the complex and violent traumatic injuries suffered by Palestinians in Gaza, including large numbers of children. Now, we covered this report in October, but here are the horrendous details again. 44 doctors, nurses, and paramedics saw multiple cases of preteen children who had been shot by a single bullet in the head or chest in Gaza. An anesthesiologist from Ohio who volunteered in Gaza reported this. I saw many children. In my experience, the gunshot wound was often to the head. Many had non-curable permanent brain damage. It was almost a daily occurrence to have children arrive at the hospital with gunshot wounds to the head. And another doctor said this. I had multiple pediatric patients, mostly under the age of 12, who were shot in the head or the left side of the chest. Usually these were single shots. The patients came in either dead or critical and died shortly after arriving. That wasn't all. It wasn't nearly all. Dr. Sidwar's survey also found that 52 medical workers found nearly universal psychiatric distress amongst Gaza's children, including suicidality, with 63 of the medical workers encountering severe malnutrition in patients, Palestinian medical workers, and the general population of Gaza. Now, those are only some of the findings laid out in that New York Times article. And if you haven't read it already, I really encourage you to seek it out. But earlier today, I was joined by its author, Feroz Sidwar, from his office in California. And I began by asking him about what the response to his article has been.
Popularly, I think the reaction has been positive, may not be the right word, but people have reacted with shock and horror, which I think is appropriate. Interestingly, there have been a few interesting reactions. One was the letters that the New York Times chose to publish about the article. Two of them apparently didn't even understand the purpose of the article. I don't think they read it. This is very strange. The one was critical of my call for an arms embargo, or our call for an arms embargo, and it was just such a strange thing to say. Oh, I don't think we need to have an arms embargo yet. It's too soon, or it's been a year. So I'm not really sure what that person was trying to say. The next critical letter was from two people who are associated with, I believe it's the Jewish American Medical Society or some such thing, and their letter said that the piece was hurtful and other such things, and I understand that. I don't think they shouldn't be allowed to have such a reaction, but why was the New York Times trying to make this into something that's against Jews? It's a very, very strange choice to publish that letter by identifying these people as associated with the Jewish American Medical Association, as if the article was somehow an attack on Jewish people or Jewish physicians. It was very odd. And then it was only the third letter that said that actually understood what the point of the article was. So the last line of the article, after running through, for people who haven't read it, just after running through a poll that I took of physicians and nurses who have been in Gaza about the certain things they saw: the shooting of children, the targeting of children with gunfire, starvation of the population, targeting of healthcare workers, other such things. Afterwards, that person said, "How can we be involved in this? This is so awful. This is just this terrible." That was the point of the article. The last line of the article is, "When this is over, we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves." The article is not about Israel; it's about our support for Israel. And I found it very strange that even the New York Times didn't seem to understand that. But popularly, I'll tell you that the reaction to the article is just horror. People just normal people don't have any. They don't come up with exotic reasons that 65 American healthcare workers are somehow in some bizarre conspiracy of lying about these things. There was all this nonsense on Twitter or whatever people use, saying that the CT images that we had at the beginning of the piece were faked. That's just pure nonsense. Interestingly enough, even doctors are willing to lie about this in public. I was shocked by that. There were two physicians who wrote for some website called thejurist.org or something, who not only said that we were lying, that these CT images were faked. They went to the point of just stating pure medical nonsense about how you can see brain injury, just things that anybody who's gone to medical school knows full well are obviously untrue. Um, and then going so far as to say that the people who participated in this article, or not to say, but to imply that the people who participated in the poll, and certainly me, should actually lose their protections as humanitarian healthcare workers when they go back. Well, that means Israel will kill us. That's outrageous. I mean, I am there. There are not many things that shock me anymore, but it was pretty shocking to see two American physicians, one an anesthesiologist and one a trauma surgeon, one at Dartmouth and one at Tufts University, so not small, not unheard of places, say such things. It's just outrageous. And furthermore, there's been no consequences for their actions. So why not say it? Why not just say any crazy nonsense as a doctor that you want, if your institution will allow it? But overall, the piece, the reaction to the piece has just been exactly what I expected with normal human beings, which is to say, my God, how can number one, how can this be happening? But number two, and much more importantly, how can we be responsible for it? That's awful.
Yeah, I think that reaction of horror, as well as the reaction by people who are perhaps in support of Israel, trying to create a sort of noise or fog around your findings, isn't surprising, because many of the findings are truly horrific. One in particular is just the frequency with which doctors and nurses and other medical workers in Gaza were encountering children with single gunshot wounds to the head. What can you tell us about your experiences of those kinds of injuries?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the article, I told a story that some people assumed was made up, or says, again, strange responses to these things. But I told a story. So when I was there, I kept a journal, and the journal probably only captured about half of the cases I saw, maybe even less. But when I came back, a reporter at the Washington Post asked me to send them the journal, so I did, and so I just read through it before I did that, and I realized that I had seen 13 children shot in the head in 14 days, or that I had documented that I had seen this, and so I may have seen more. The time there is definitely a blur. And I had gone to a conference, I think in Michigan somewhere, and I'd sat next to Thayer Ahmed. He's an emergency medicine doctor in Chicago, who's also been to Gaza, and he told me that. Or when we sat next to each other, I just kind of casually mentioned, "Oh, you were in Gaza, and nice to meet you." One thing that just blew me away was how many kids I saw shot in the head. And his response was, "Oh yeah, me too. Every single day I saw kids shot in the head," and that surprised me, because I had assumed that there was just some either sadistic sniper or drone team or whatever around Gaza, or around the European hospital where I was, that was doing these things, But when I spoke to him about it, I realized maybe this is actually more widespread. Now, it's important to remember the vast majority of children who are being injured and killed in Gaza are being injured in explosions, airstrikes, tank shellings, artillery shelling, drone attacks with missiles, whatever it might be. But the reason that I focused on the shooting of children with single gunshots to the head is because it makes it kind of impossible to deny that they were targeted. Certainly one kid that gets shot in the head, okay, yeah, that could have been in a crossfire or an accident or something like that. Two kids, okay, fine. But when throughout the Gaza Strip for a year, in the catchment area of every hospital where an international has been present, children are getting shot in the head on a regular, if not daily basis, that's not believable. That's an accident. That's clearly deliberate on the people on the part of the people who are doing the shooting. And it seems quite obvious that it's just being tolerated by the Israeli military, and they have no incentive to stop it and no reason to, because the US won't force them to.
Yeah, we had strikingly similar testimony last week in Parliament from a British surgeon called Nizam Mahmood, who described targeting of children by quadcopters in Gaza, really offering horrific details of the kind of injuries that they received then. Another aspect of your report deals with the widespread psychiatric and psychological distress that people in Gaza are enduring. Can you tell us some more about that?
Yeah, so it's important to remember what Gaza was on October 6th of 2023, the day before the Hamas attack. Gaza had been subjected to a blockade, literally a military blockade that started in 2007, long time ago. In 2008, just a year later, and what, 16, 17 years ago now, Mary Robinson, the international elder, former president of Ireland, she visited Gaza. This is just after 1 year of the blockade. And she said their whole civilization has been destroyed. I'm not exaggerating. Those are all her words. And then she went on to say that it's unbelievable that the world doesn't care about this while it's happening. After that, since then, I should say, Gaza has been subjected to, I think it's 12 Israeli military attacks. The three most destructive were Operation Cast Lead in 2008 and 9, and then Operation Polar Defense in 2012, and then Operation Protective Edge in 2014. After Operation Protective Edge, the president of the International Committee for the Red Cross, whose job it is to go to horrendous disaster zones, said, and this is 2014, 11 years ago, he said, I have never in my life seen destruction on this scale. It blew him away. He was just completely shocked by it. Sarah Roy, who's probably the world's leading expert on the Gaza Strip, she lived there for a long time. She knows the place very well. She works at Harvard's Center for Middle Eastern Studies. She wrote after the 2014 attack that, I'm quoting almost exactly as best I can remember, in all the years that I've been studying Gaza, I have never seen the human, psychological, and physical devastation that I see there today. And she went on to say that this is creating an incredibly dangerous situation, not only for Palestinians in Gaza, but also for Israel, because everyone in Gaza is losing hope that peace with Israel is even possible. Now, then you come to the Great March of Return, 2018, a festive, open, not even slightly violent in its first 6 months, not so much as a stone being thrown. What does Israel do? Israel builds berms right outside of Gaza, lines snipers up on them, and for 6 months shoots people dead. No threat, nothing. Well, so yeah, these people have been subjected to absolute terror for their entire lives. And you also have to remember, Gaza is a very, very young territory. Half the population, literally half the population, is under 18. 15% of people are under the age of 5. So most of them have grown up only in the most extreme version of the Israeli occupation, which is the blockade and the periodic military attacks on Gaza. So then comes October 7th, and now the entire place has been obliterated. Well, now you have some very unusual psychological phenomenon being kind of rearing up now. The most shocking one is suicidality among children. And I'm not talking about 17-year-olds. I'm talking about 5-year-olds. Children who regularly say they wish they were dead, who wish they had died with their families, who wish they could see. This is not a common scenario. I've worked in Ukraine. I've worked in Zimbabwe. I've worked in Haiti. I have never encountered a child, a toddler, who said they wanted to die. That's very, very uncommon. And this is seen universally throughout Gaza. Every medical team that goes there sees this. And we were certainly not the first people to point this out. I think Medical Aid for Palestinians and Doctors Without Borders had also issued press releases about this. So yeah, the psychological devastation is dramatic. There's a woman named Arwa something. I forget her last name, unfortunately. She is I believe, Syrian and Palestinian descent, and she used to work for CNN. Now she runs an NGO that provides comfort to children in war zones in the Middle East. And she told a story about she was speaking with a mother in Gaza, and the mother was telling her that her son, a small child, I think maybe 4 or 5 years old, has severe psychological problems. And then the way she put it was, since he saw her sister's head explode. And this mother went on, and they kept talking. And eventually this lady, Arwa, realized that this mom had also been there when her daughter's head had been blown off. And at some point, this mother realized that Arwa had realized this. And she said, I know what you're thinking, but I have to stay strong, and I can't think about it right now because I have a child who's still alive. These are things that human beings have a limit. They do. And what's going on in Gaza is even before October 7th, was well beyond that limit.
That story you just told literally took my breath away while you were telling it. Now, obviously, when you were in Gaza, you were there as a medic with a huge responsibility to try and patch up the people who are suffering through this incredible carnage, and then send them back out into it. What kind of impact did that have on you as a doctor and as a person?
Honestly, I'm used to such things. I'm a trauma surgeon in a town in the United States called Stockton, California. It's a very poor, very rough town. A lot of homelessness, a lot of violence. So I'm actually, it's quite unfortunate, but I'm actually used to that feeling. But I will tell you that so I'm okay. I'll tell you though, everyone else, quite literally everyone else from the trip that I went on has intrusive remembering nightmares. I do have dreams about Gaza, but I wouldn't call them nightmares. I don't wake up in a terror or something like that. But they're not pleasant, to be sure. But they're not. I wouldn't say they haunt me. But I'll tell you, if you want to see the effect that this has had on doctors, there was during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. When Kamala Harris was anointed as the Democratic nominee for the presidency, there was a group of doctors that gave a talk, brief talks, and I read off a statement from Dr. Mark Perlmutter. He's a Jewish American surgeon that I was in Gaza with, and he in it he said, I'm forgetting the exact words now, but he said something like, speaking to President Biden and Kamala Harris, I wish you could see the nightmares that haunt us every night. Pictures of children maimed and mutilated, and their inconsolable mothers begging us to stay there. If you look at me while I'm giving that talk, Tanya Haj-Hassan, who is, again, also a very seasoned war surgeon, she works with Doctors Without Borders and I believe other groups. She has been to some of the worst places in the world, Sudan, South Sudan. She was in Gaza as well. She starts crying and has to walk away from the frame. It's not some, I don't want to make us out to be victims. We choose to go there, and we should choose to go there because our governments are responsible for what's happening. But no, it does take a toll on a lot of people, and that's honestly one of the things that really motivates a lot of people to try and stop this insanity and this carnage when they come back, because you honestly just can't forget about it. It's impossible. Like I said, I've worked in Ukraine, I've worked in Zimbabwe, I've worked in Haiti. I was there at the Boston Marathon bombing. These are also not forgettable places or forgettable moments. But Gaza is an entirely different thing. You get the sense when you're in Gaza that it is kind of a prelude to the end of humanity in a lot of ways. It's really terrifying. And I don't have children, but if I did, I can only imagine the drive and the need that one would have to stop this kind of insanity from spreading to the rest of the world, or even just 1 inch outside of Gaza.
And you have, in fact, tried very hard to stop this insanity spreading to the rest of the world by holding your leaders accountable. You've tried to arrange meetings between the medical workers who spoke to you or who worked in Gaza, between them and Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, various other people within the Democratic Party. How has that gone?
Unfortunately, as expected, which was it didn't go anywhere. So in July, right after Benjamin Netanyahu's speech, me and 44 other American healthcare workers who'd been in Gaza released a letter to the Biden administration calling for an end to arms sales to Israel, and actually for an arms blockade on the entire region. When I sent that letter, I did receive some, one sentence acknowledgments from lower level staffers at the National Security Council that I sent it to, just saying, thank you for your letter. Of course, the Biden administration continues to work tirelessly for a ceasefire. It went on, and as the anniversary of October 7th approached, we said, "My God, this is still happening." We couldn't believe it. Never would have imagined that it would go on for this long. And so we wrote another letter. It's basically the same letter, just with a little bit of updated language. And but this time, 99 healthcare workers total signed it. Now, I can't think of a time when 99 or almost 100 doctors sent the president of the United States a letter saying that they had witnessed atrocities with their own eyes committed with American weapons by an American ally. I don't think that's happened before, to be perfectly honest. We didn't get so much as an acknowledgement of the letter this time. Literally nothing. I had one meeting maybe 2 weeks ago with I would say, a high-level State Department person. These things are supposed to be confidential, so I don't think I should say who they were. And I do know that that person has been very actively involved in trying to get the U.S. to change what it's doing in Gaza. That person's been involved in a lot of other major humanitarian actions throughout the world. They're very serious, but they're not having any effect. And I think it's quite obvious why. I'll just tell you, actually, during that meeting, and from other meetings I've had with people who work in government, not high level appointees, but they work there. They've all said that it's not. I should stop assuming that all the way up to the highest level of government, people don't know what the Israelis are doing. They said everybody knows exactly what the Israelis are doing. In fact, they probably know worse things than you do, which is not surprising. It's not some secret. I mean, it's hardly a secret that the Israelis have destroyed the entire Gaza Strip, are starving most of the population, are slaughtering a population that is half children, are concentrating them onto the 14% of their territory, making it the most crowded place in the world, putting them into a place, putting 1 million people in a place that has 120 toilets, according to Oxfam. It's just outrageous. This isn't happening anywhere else in the world. And so the U.S. knows what's going on, even all the way up to the Biden administration, meaning all the way up to President Biden and Kamala Harris herself. And they've just decided that based on political calculations, it's not worth it to stop it. That's terrifying. So I'm not so surprised that we didn't get meetings with the administration. And it's kind of funny too, because I think if the administration had met with us and then made a public showing, just saying we met with these doctors and we're gonna, we heard what they said, they wouldn't have had to do anything. They could have easily spun that probably into a victory with Arab Americans in Michigan, probably maybe even won the election. But they're just so fanatically committed to this project of destroying the Palestinians. And why, I couldn't tell you, but it's just obvious that they are. They're just so fanatically committed to it that they wouldn't even do that. They wouldn't even save their own political skin by meeting with a few American doctors. Furthermore, the people we wanted them to meet with are Adam Homowy, who is an American lieutenant colonel, retired, a veteran, and he's famous for saving an American senator's life when she was serving as a soldier in Iraq, Tammy Duckworth. The other person was a Jewish American, Mark Perlmutter. And the third person was me, Feroz, who I'm nobody special, but I've had a New York Times article published. I've been published in Politico. It's kind of shocking, honestly, to see the depth to which, or the incredible dedication of the American political elite, the American ruling class, whatever you want to call them, to this project. It's kind of outrageous. It tells you something about our own society, and this generalizes to the West in general. It's certainly not only the United States, but yeah, and you know better than I do. I'm sure Britain is almost as bad. Canada is almost as bad. Australia is almost as bad. Most of Europe, Germany is maybe the worst.
On that commitment to, in a very striking phrase that you used, a prelude to the end of humanity. Obviously, the government in the US is going to change to perhaps an even more fanatically committed one. Just in brief, what are your thoughts about the future, Feroz?
I don't know what the Trump administration is going to do when it comes in. It's very unlikely that it's just going to all of a sudden cut off arms sales to Israel. That doesn't seem believable. But whether or not the Trump administration can be pushed in certain directions, who knows? People have made a lot of. I believe her name is Miriam Adelson. She's the widow of Sheldon Adelson. a Jewish American casino magnate, and I think it'd be accurate to have called him a pro-Israel fanatic. But she has said basically publicly that her condition for supporting the Trump administration was that Israel gets to annex the West Bank. Well, that's actually already happened. The International Court of Justice has ruled that Israel already annexed the West Bank, and that's why the occupation is illegal. Because it's not an occupation, it's just an outright annexation, and that's why they said it has to end. Okay. I mean, I don't know that that's better or worse than having the fictitious nonsense that's been going on under Democratic administrations, like the Oslo process, and then the whatever Obama was doing when he was in office. All of these things are just facades by which the Israelis have been able to buy time and continue colonizing the West Bank and destroying Gaza. Well, okay, if that ends, all the better. At least things will be more honest. But what it means, what the Trump administration means in terms of policy for the Palestinians, I really have no idea. All I know is that me and the other physicians and nurses who've been there will keep pushing for our country to stop acting in this insane and cruel way to these people for no reason.
It was Feroz Sidwa who spoke to me earlier today, and I can't get that line, "A prelude to the end of humanity," out of my mind when he gives us those grotesque descriptions of injuries in Palestine. But it was also about as gripping and as frank an interview you could ever get about the relation of the US government's foreign affairs apparatus to the Israeli regime. Dalia, Feroz told us a lot about the horrific conditions on the ground in Gaza, but he also revealed that a high up in the State Department said the administration knows not only exactly what Israel is doing, but probably even worse things than we know. What did you make of that?
I mean, first of all, that was like an incredible interview. That, Feroz's, I mean, he seems very humble. I'm sure he would, reject me saying this, but what a courageous man. And I think it's such a stark contrast to the revolting cowardice of Mike Huckabee that we saw in the previous segment. A man who says, I've been to Israel dozens of times, and every single time he's been to Israel, he's been, welcomed with open arms and greeted in, I'm sure, the most luxurious ways by the Israeli state. I would like to see Mike Huckabee spend an hour in a hospital in Gaza and see if he comes out the shill that he went in. In terms of the fact that people high up in the US government, all the way up to President Biden, are aware of what's going on, I'm not surprised. I mean, these people have eyes and ears. They have the same internet that we have. They have the same ability to read and listen to the countless testimonies from every single person that has stepped foot into Gaza, the countless testimonies that corroborate one another on the scale of destruction and devastation that's happening here. The reason that our leaders are not doing anything is not for lack of knowledge. It's not for lack of information. It's for lack of humanity and basic morality. And unfortunately, it comes down to something quite as simple as that. Because one thing that the Israelis and their allies always try and do is they try to use these seemingly benign concepts like neutrality and this idea that, this is a two-side conflict and, you need to get people who are neutral. And there's all kinds of reasons why anyone that has sympathy with the Palestinians is actually just biased. You see it every time an activist or an academic or anyone is introduced in news media. They'll be introduced as a pro-Palestine person, whereas someone who is deeply intertwined with the Israeli project or who is a Zionist will be introduced as some kind of neutral person. Whenever someone comes and says, basic facts about what's happening on the ground in Palestine, they will be accused of being biased, as if, that's the problem with the way that this issue is discussed, when in fact, if there is such a thing as a neutral person, every single neutral person and entity that has stepped foot in Gaza has said not only is this a horror show, but this is an exception to every kind of rule or norm of war that we have ever seen. Even those of us who are experienced in other wartime contexts, what we are seeing here is categorically different. There is complete consensus amongst people who have actually been to Gaza about what is happening. And so when these leaders who will have more information than any of us, whose job it is to understand what's happening, especially when they are the ones who are signing off the military budgets and signing the statements that offer political cover for this genocide. They are the ones who will know more than anyone. They have seen everything that we have seen and more. And so if they can see all of that and still bring themselves to make choices that continue to fuel this genocidal, maniacal machine that is the Israeli state, then you can only assume that they share the genocidal ambitions of that state, because they have the power to withdraw the literal fuel that is fueling this. They have the information. What they don't have is the moral integrity and the absence of a desire to destroy a people. And that is why we are in this situation. No one who is culpable in the genocide that we are seeing, none of our leaders that have been directly and indirectly responsible for the atrocious scenes that we have seen in Palestine over the past year and way before that, none of those people, when the dust settles historically, none of those people will ever be able to say, we just didn't know how bad it was. They knew, and they continue to be complicit, and I can only assume it's because they share the genocidal ambitions of the Israeli state.
Well, certainly, if they don't share those ambitions, as you say, they're now certainly complicit in that genocide in a way that it serves their interests to continue to conceal from us. I mean, the imperative to constantly distort the facts on the ground, to constantly distort what we see on our own, well, not our TV screens so much, but online or on some channels, to distort the testimonies that come out of Gaza, to distort what is happening to even journalists on the ground in Gaza who can't then report what's happening in Gaza. This imperative is completely psychopathic, and it's unimaginable to me where it comes from, what drives it, what the political purpose of this could be. I mean, I can see that at some point, there's an ally and you've got to stand up for them because there's geopolitical interest or whatever. There's a geopolitical advantage to having a good relationship with that country, to preserving that spot in the Middle East. But at this point, there's zero political advantage to continuing to support Israel's, frankly, genocidal campaign against the Palestinians, which is only growing and spreading. Seems completely inexplicable to me. And I really think the shocking thing in what Feroz said was this idea that, in fact, according to this high up in the State Department, things are even worse than we think. Revelations of disaster presumably only to come once Israel's project is complete. What a depressing thought, Dalia.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know what other piece of evidence can be presented to these. We've got testimonies, we've got international agencies that have gone, we've got quotes from Israeli military personnel and politicians boasting about the fact that they shoot anything that moves in the region. What my question to these ghouls in the US and British state and various European state would be, what piece of information from what institution would you need to hear in order to believe that what is happening is wrong? If you can answer that question, let's have a conversation, because there is no form of reputable body or process or protocol for at least incessant war crimes, if not genocide, that hasn't been cleared. I can only assume it's the exact inverse, where it's like, if you say something to them that diverts from the kind of narrativization of what's happening, no matter how much evidence you have to back it up, if you say something that diverts from that narrative, it's assumed to be bias. It's actually the other way around. They're not receiving information and allowing that to influence their position. And when you have that dynamic, it becomes incredibly difficult to think about what we can actually do to strategize to change this policy, because these people are not responding to established protocol, process, and fact. So the question is, what are they going to respond to?